Evelyn Carmichael, 36, always believed her marriage to Conrad was solid. They had been together for 12 years, a couple many considered exemplary. She was an architect, meticulous and passionate about her work, while Conrad, 38, was a dedicated lawyer known for his integrity and ethics. Together, they had built a comfortable life in a cozy suburban home in Portland. Their routine was steady. Every morning began with a quick coffee in their sunny kitchen, followed by rushed kisses as they each left for work. In the evenings, they enjoyed movies or quiet dinners at home. To Evelyn, this stability meant security. However, in recent months, something about Conrad seemed different. He had become more introspective, spending more time lost in thought than engaged in their usual daily conversations. At first, Evelyn didn't think much of it. She assumed it was the stress of a case at work, something common in Conrad's career. But small details began to catch her attention. Shorter responses, distant gazes during dinner, and an unusual hesitation when starting meaningful conversations. One Saturday afternoon, while watering her plants in the garden, Evelyn noticed Conrad sitting on the porch with a notebook open on his lap. He seemed to be writing something but paused frequently, as if hesitating. Curious, she approached him, but as she got closer, he quickly closed the notebook and changed the subject. "What are you writing?" Evelyn asked with a casual smile. "Oh, nothing much. Just some ideas for a work project." He avoided looking directly at her. His evasive response stirred an unsettling feeling in Evelyn. They had always been transparent with each other, or so she believed. Something was different, but she didn't want to pressure him. She decided to observe, hoping Conrad would eventually share whatever was on his mind. That night, as they prepared for bed, Evelyn tried to start a conversation. "Are you okay, Con? You've seemed so thoughtful lately." "Just work, Evelyn. I promise everything's fine." He kissed her forehead and turned to his side, ending the conversation. But for Evelyn, that response only deepened her doubts. What could be making Conrad so reserved? She didn't know, but she felt that something bigger was coming. The following week, Conrad suggested they go out for dinner. For Evelyn, it was a relief. It had been a while since they had a special moment outside the house, and the idea felt like an attempt to reconnect. He chose a small Italian restaurant they both loved during the early years of their marriage, which brought back fond memories for Evelyn. When they arrived, the atmosphere was delightful. The soft candlelight and the aroma of fresh herbs created an intimate setting. Evelyn smiled, pleased with the gesture. "It's been a long time since we came here, Con. This feels like the perfect night for it." Conrad smiled back, but there was something in his eyes, a mix of nervousness and hesitation that Evelyn couldn't ignore. During dinner, he asked about her work and mentioned a few cases he was handling, but his mind seemed elsewhere. Finally, after dessert, Conrad set his utensils down and looked at Evelyn intensely. "Evelyn, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." She tensed, surprised by his serious tone. "Of course. What is it?" He hesitated for a moment, looking at his hands before continuing. "Have you ever thought about desires? About things you've always wanted but never had the courage to say out loud?" Evelyn was intrigued but tried to keep the tone light. "I think we all have something like that, don't we? Why are you asking me this?" Conrad let out a sigh, as if gathering the courage to continue. "It's just that sometimes I feel like life moves so fast. Maybe we should talk about things we've kept to ourselves." His words made her uncomfortable. There was a depth and weight to the conversation that she hadn't anticipated. "Con, are you talking about something specific?" she asked, trying to decipher what he was really trying to say. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the waiter bringing the bill. Conrad quickly changed the subject, thanking the waiter and paying the bill. Evelyn was left without answers, but the tension lingered in the air. On the drive home, the silence in the car was palpable. Evelyn decided not to press him, but Conrad's words kept echoing in her mind. What did he mean by desires he never had the courage to share? It felt like more than just a casual thought, and she knew it wouldn't be long before he revealed what he had been keeping inside. The days following the dinner were marked by a sense of strangeness. Evelyn noticed that although Conrad had returned to his normal routine, something felt different. He was more reserved, avoiding long conversations and even the casual moments they used to share, like watching a movie together or discussing the news. One evening, while Conrad was working in his home office, Evelyn felt an urge to try to connect with him. She decided to bring him a cup of coffee, just like she used to do in the early years of their marriage. As she entered the office, she noticed he was once again holding the notebook he had hastily closed days ago. This time, he set it aside as soon as he saw her. "I brought you some coffee," she said with a hesitant smile. "Oh, thanks," Conrad replied, taking the cup without looking directly at her. Evelyn sat in the armchair in the corner, pretending to be distracted by a book she had picked up from the shelf. However, her eyes kept drifting toward the notebook. Something about it seemed important. "That notebook seems to be taking up a lot of your time lately," she commented casually. Conrad hesitated before responding. "It's just something personal. Nothing for you to worry about." His response, though neutral, left Evelyn uneasy. Why was he hiding something personal from her? This behavior was unusual for Conrad, who had always been open with her. Later that night, while Conrad slept soundly, Evelyn found herself tempted to look at the notebook. She got out of bed and went to the office. There it was, sitting on the desk, partially covered by papers. Torn between curiosity and respect for his privacy, she hesitated for long minutes. In the end, she decided not to open it, but the weight of what that object might contain stayed with her. In the following days, Conrad continued showing signs that something was on his mind. During dinner, he asked a seemingly casual question that caught Evelyn off guard. "Do you think there's something in our marriage we could change? Something that might be missing?" Evelyn looked at him, surprised. "I've never thought about that, Con. I always thought we were fine, but now... Do you think something's missing?" Conrad quickly shook his head, almost as if to undo the question. "No, forget it. It was just a thought. Nothing's wrong." But Evelyn knew there was more behind that question. Her unease grew, and she felt that Conrad was on the verge of sharing something that would change everything. She just didn't know if she was ready to hear it. The week dragged on slowly, and Evelyn felt like she was carrying an invisible weight. The tension between her and Conrad seemed to grow each day, even though he tried to mask it with gestures of normalcy. Still, Evelyn knew something was about to change. On Friday night, as they prepared for dinner, Conrad suggested they talk in the living room before eating. He seemed anxious, pacing back and forth while Evelyn watched him with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Evelyn, I need to tell you something," he began, sitting beside her on the couch. Evelyn felt her heart race. "You're scaring me, Con. What's going on?" He took a deep breath and held her hands firmly. "You know I love you, right? I want you to understand that this doesn't change anything between us. But I need to be honest about something I've been holding onto for a long time." Evelyn froze, trying to process his words. "Honest about what?" Conrad hesitated for a moment, as if gathering the courage to continue. "I've been thinking about something I've never shared with you. It's a desire that's always been with me, but I've never had the courage to say it out loud. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I was afraid of how you'd react." His words felt heavy, and Evelyn experienced a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "What desire is that, Conrad? Please be direct." He looked away for a moment before finally speaking. "Before I met you, I had very strong feelings for someone. I never acted on them because that person was in another relationship, but those feelings stayed with me for a long time. And now, that person is back in town. It's made me think about things I thought I had moved past." Evelyn sat in silence, shock overtaking her thoughts. "Are you talking about Marianne?" Conrad looked up, surprised that she had guessed. "Yes. I didn't expect you to remember her." Evelyn felt her stomach churn. Marianne was a former colleague of Conrad's, someone he had mentioned casually early in their marriage. Although Evelyn had never felt jealous of her before, the idea that she still occupied space in Conrad's thoughts now made her feel insecure. "Why are you telling me this now? What do you expect me to do with this?" Conrad gripped her hands tighter. "Because I don't want to hide anything from you. It doesn't mean I want anything with her. I just needed you to know. I don't want this to come between us." Evelyn felt tears well up in her eyes, but didn't know if it was relief at his honesty or fear of the impact this confession would have on their marriage. She took a deep breath before responding. "Con, this is a lot to process. I appreciate your honesty, but I don't know how to feel about this." The silence between them was heavy. Although Conrad had finally shared his secret, Evelyn knew this was just the beginning of something that could completely transform their relationship. Evelyn couldn't sleep that night. Conrad's words echoed in her mind, turning over every thought she had about their marriage. Marianne, someone who once seemed so insignificant, now loomed as a shadow over their relationship. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Evelyn wondered how their love, which once felt so solid, had reached this point. The next morning, Conrad acted as if nothing had happened. He made breakfast, talked about work, and even tried to start a casual conversation about the new neighbor. Evelyn, however, couldn't pretend everything was normal. "Conrad, we need to talk about last night," she said, cutting him off mid-sentence. He stopped, setting his coffee cup on the table. "I knew you'd say that." Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions inside her. "You said you still think about her. What does that mean? Do you want to see her? Do you want something with her?" Conrad shook his head quickly. "No, Evelyn, that's not it. I just wanted to be honest with you. That part of my life has been tucked away for a long time, and I felt like I needed to share it so there wouldn't be any secrets between us." Evelyn crossed her arms, still skeptical. "Then why now? Why did you decide to tell me this now, after so many years?" Conrad hesitated before responding. "Because she's back in town. And honestly, it brought up some memories I thought were buried. I didn't want you to hear this from someone else or think there was anything more going on." His words sounded sincere, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling of insecurity. "And what if those memories aren't as buried as you think, Conrad? What does that mean for us?" He stood up from the table, walking to the window and staring out at the garden. "It means I need to deal with this, Evelyn. And I want you to know that I'm committed to our marriage. I just needed to be honest so I wouldn't carry this weight alone." That response left Evelyn in a dilemma. On one hand, she admired Conrad's honesty. On the other, the mere fact that Marianne still occupied his thoughts made her question everything. "I don't know what to think about this, Conrad, but I do know I need time to figure out what all of this means." He nodded, returning to his seat at the table. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm here, ready to work through this with you." Evelyn didn't respond. She stood up and went to the bedroom, feeling that the distance between them, once emotional, was now almost tangible. In the days that followed, Evelyn began paying closer attention to Conrad's habits. Although he insisted he was committed to their marriage, his change in behavior continued to unsettle her. He left for work earlier, came home later, and seemed distracted even when they were together. One afternoon, while organizing papers in the home office, Evelyn found a business card with Marianne's name on it. It was tucked away in the back of a drawer, among some of Conrad's work documents. Her heart raced. Marianne had been part of the past, but now she seemed to be present in Conrad's life in a way he hadn't mentioned. Evelyn hesitated before confronting him. That night, during dinner, she tried to bring up the subject casually. "Con, did you know some of your old things are still in the home office? I was organizing today and came across a business card from Marianne." Conrad paused mid-bite, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Oh yeah. She stopped by my office a few weeks ago. It was about a project she's working on. It wasn't important." Evelyn felt a pang of distrust. "And you didn't think you should tell me about it? That's not exactly what you said the other night when you mentioned her." Conrad set his fork down and sighed. "Because I knew you'd react like this. It was nothing, Evelyn. She just needed a reference for her work, and I helped. That's all." But Evelyn couldn't shake the unease. Marianne's presence, even fleeting, seemed to be shaking the foundations of her marriage. "You think it doesn't matter, but it does. You just confessed that you still think about her, and now I find out you met with her without telling me." Conrad remained silent, visibly uncomfortable. "I understand how this looks, but you have to trust me. There's nothing going on." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She tried convincing herself that Conrad was being honest, but doubt had already taken root. She decided she needed to confront Marianne herself to understand exactly what was happening. The next day, Evelyn went to Conrad's office under the pretense of bringing him the lunch he had forgotten at home. When she arrived, she saw Marianne speaking with the receptionist. Marianne looked exactly as Evelyn remembered. Confident, elegant, and with a presence that couldn't be ignored. Evelyn took a deep breath before approaching. "Marianne, right? I'm Evelyn, Conrad's wife." Marianne seemed surprised but smiled politely. "Evelyn, Yes, of course. It's such a pleasure to finally meet you. Conrad always speaks so highly of you. The exchange was cordial, but Evelyn felt a palpable tension. As Marianne said her goodbyes and left the building, Evelyn couldn't help but wonder if she posed a real threat or if her own fears were turning the situation into something bigger than it was. After the brief encounter with Marianne, Evelyn spent the rest of the day lost in thought. Marianne's politeness and kindness only deepened the unease in her heart. She didn't seem to be a direct threat, but her presence was enough to reopen wounds and raise doubts about what was really going on in Conrad's mind. That evening, as they ate dinner, Evelyn finally decided she couldn't keep her concerns bottled up any longer. "Conrad, we need to talk about Marianne," she began, looking directly at him. Conrad, who had just taken a sip of wine, carefully set his glass down on the table. "What do you want to know, Evelyn? I've already told you there's nothing going on." Evelyn crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "It's not just about you. I met her today, and I don't know why, but I feel like there's something you're not telling me." Conrad sighed, as if gathering the strength to respond. "I've told you everything, Evelyn. I helped her with a professional contact. That's all." Evelyn shook her head, frustrated. "But don't you see how this makes me feel? You admitted she's been on your mind, and now you're working with her again. That's not normal, Conrad." He was silent for a moment, clearly thinking about what to say. Finally, he looked up at her. "Maybe we should talk to her together." Evelyn blinked, stunned. "What? Talk to her together? For what, Conrad? To make this even more uncomfortable for me." "No, Evelyn," he said in a calmer tone. "I think you're imagining things that don't exist. If we talk to her together, maybe it'll help you see there's nothing between us." Conrad's proposal was disconcerting. Evelyn felt he genuinely believed it would help, but to her, it seemed like a way to validate his own feelings toward Marianne. "And you think that's going to fix things? Sitting next to her is supposed to make me trust you again." Conrad leaned forward, holding her hands. "I just want you to see there's nothing to fear, Evelyn. I want all of this to be in the past so we can move forward." Evelyn didn't know how to respond. On one hand, she wanted to believe in Conrad's sincerity. On the other, the idea of confronting Marianne again seemed absurd and unnecessary. "I'll think about it," she replied, standing up from the table. As she walked upstairs to their bedroom, her mind was spinning. Conrad's proposal seemed well-intentioned, but it also raised questions she wasn't ready to face. Deep down, Evelyn knew that meeting with Marianne would be a turning point for their marriage, one way or another. After a sleepless night, Evelyn finally decided to accept Conrad's proposal. Although the idea of meeting with Marianne made her uncomfortable, she felt she needed to face this situation head-on to find answers and perhaps peace for her marriage. The next morning, Conrad was surprised when Evelyn said, "If you think this will help, let's meet her. But let me be clear, I'm not comfortable with this." Conrad nodded, respecting her tone. "I understand, Evelyn. Thank you for being willing to do this." They arranged the meeting for that afternoon at a discreet cafe near Conrad's office. Evelyn spent the morning in a whirlwind of thoughts, questioning if she was making the right decision. Deep down, she feared what she might discover. When they arrived at the cafe, Marianne was already there, sitting at a corner table. She smiled when she saw them and waved politely. Evelyn felt a mix of anxiety and distrust as they approached. "Conrad, Evelyn, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect to see you two together," Marianne said warmly. Evelyn forced a smile while Conrad responded, "Thank you for meeting with us, Marianne. We wanted to clear up a few things, and I thought it would be best to do this together." Marianne raised her eyebrows, clearly intrigued, but maintained her composure. "Of course. What's going on?" Conrad took a deep breath, trying to choose his words carefully. "Evelyn and I have been having some disagreements lately, and part of it has to do with you being back in town. I mentioned to her that you were at my office recently, and it raised some concerns." Marianne leaned forward slightly, looking genuinely surprised. "Concerns? Conrad, we only talked about work. I never imagined it would cause any problems between you two." Evelyn finally spoke up, unable to contain the tension. "Don't you think it's strange to show up after all these years, knowing my husband once had feelings for you?" Marianne blinked, shocked by Evelyn's bluntness. "I had no idea that was still an issue. To be honest, I never saw our past that way. For me, it was always a friendship. Nothing more. Evelyn felt a momentary sense of relief, but something in Marianne's reaction still left her uneasy. So why reconnect now? Do you really need Conrad's help? Or is it something more? Marianne replied calmly, but her tone grew more serious. Evelyn, I respect your marriage. If my presence is causing issues, I can assure you there's nothing on my end to justify it. I only reached out to Conrad because I trust his professional opinion. I had no intention of stirring up anything personal. Conrad watched the two in silence, realizing the conversation was becoming more direct than he anticipated. He placed a hand over Evelyn's and said, Marianne, thank you for clarifying. I think we need to focus on resolving this between the two of us now. Marianne nodded, seemingly relieved. If you need anything else, I'm available. I hope you both can work through this. As Marianne said her goodbyes and left the cafe, Evelyn felt a mix of emotions. Although the conversation had been relatively calm, she knew the issues in her marriage hadn't disappeared. Marianne's presence was only the surface of something deeper, the broken trust between her and Conrad. After the meeting with Marianne, Evelyn and Conrad returned home in silence. The weight of the conversation still hung over them, and Evelyn felt that while Marianne's words had been reassuring, her presence in Conrad's life still cast a difficult-to-shake shadow. That night, as they prepared for bed, Evelyn finally broke the silence. Con, I still don't understand why you needed her to resolve something from the past. If she never meant that much, why are we still dealing with this? Conrad sat on the edge of the bed, looking exhausted. I don't know, Evelyn. Maybe because I never really dealt with it. I thought time would erase everything. But somehow, it feels like those memories were just waiting for an opportunity to resurface. Evelyn felt a pang of pain in her chest. And what does that say about us? About what we have? Do you know how this makes me feel? Conrad looked at her with sincerity. I do. And I hate myself for hurting you like this. But I want you to know that you're the person I want to be with. I just need to find a way to put this behind me once and for all. His words sounded sincere, but Evelyn couldn't ignore how she felt. Confusion, jealousy, and pain swirled together in an emotional storm she didn't know how to face. The next day, Evelyn decided she needed a moment to herself. She went to the nearby park, where she often walked to clear her mind. As she strolled among the trees, she thought about everything that had happened over the past few days. Their marriage, which once felt so solid, now seemed fragile and full of uncertainty. Back at home, she found Conrad in the living room, reviewing some papers. He looked lost in thought, and Evelyn realized he was also fighting his own internal battle. She sat beside him, trying to find some connection. Con, I want us to be honest with each other. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If we're going to get through this, we need to start there. Conrad looked at her, a mix of relief and worry in his eyes. You're right. I should never have kept this to myself for so long. But I also need you to believe me when I say I want to fix things. Evelyn nodded, though she still felt the weight of doubt. I want to believe you, but you need to understand that trust takes time to rebuild. This isn't going to happen overnight. Conrad took her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm willing to wait. I just hope that, in the end, you'll still want to stay by my side. In that moment, Evelyn realized that despite everything, there was still love between them. But she also knew that love was being tested like never before. The path to reconciliation would be long, and she wasn't sure if they were both ready to face it. The days following their conversation were marked by silence and introspection. Evelyn and Conrad continued to share the same space, but it felt as if an emotional chasm separated them. Both knew they needed to make a decision about their future, but the fear of making the wrong move kept them stuck. One night, as they ate dinner in silence, Conrad finally spoke. Evelyn, we can't keep going like this. It's destroying us. She looked at him, surprised by his candor. I know, Conrad, but what do you suggest? How do we fix something that feels like it's falling apart? Conrad took a deep breath before replying. I think we need professional help. We need someone to mediate this, to help us understand how we got here and how to move forward. Evelyn hesitated. The idea of therapy had never crossed her mind, but given the situation, it seemed like the only logical option. Do you think that'll work? That someone from the outside can fix something so personal? I don't think they'll fix it for us, Conrad replied. but maybe they can show us how to fix it together. Because, Evelyn, I don't want to lose you, no matter what it takes." His words struck something deep in Evelyn. As hurt as she was, she knew there was still love between them. And deep down, she wanted to believe that love was enough to overcome what they were facing. "All right," she said finally. "Let's try. But only if it's a real effort from both of us." Conrad nodded, relieved. "I promise, Evelyn. I'll do whatever it takes." The following week, they scheduled their first session with a couples therapist, Dr. Morgan, a man with a calm and objective approach. During the initial consultation, he asked them both to share how they were feeling. Conrad spoke first. "I feel like I let things from the past interfere with the present. And because of that, I hurt the person I love most." Evelyn listened in silence, her hands clenched in her lap. When it was her turn, she was honest. "I feel like my trust has been broken. And while I want to believe what he says, it's hard not to think that something like this could happen again." Dr. Morgan listened attentively before responding. "Trust is something that can be rebuilt, but it requires effort from both sides. The first step is deciding if you're both willing to let go of pride and work together to find a way forward." As they drove home after the session, Evelyn noticed a slight shift in the atmosphere between them. The session hadn't solved everything, but it was the beginning of something. For the first time in weeks, she felt that maybe there was a way out of the pain they were both facing. That night, before bed, Conrad held her hand and said, "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know it won't be easy, but I'll do everything I can not to let you down." Evelyn smiled faintly, tears welling in her eyes. "Just don't give me a reason to regret it, Conrad." After their first therapy session, Evelyn and Conrad began incorporating Dr. Morgan's guidance into their daily lives. The changes were small but meaningful. More time for honest conversations, fewer external distractions, and a joint effort to rebuild what they had lost. One evening, during dinner, Conrad suggested something unexpected. "Evelyn, I've been thinking, what if we took a weekend just for us? Somewhere far from here, where we can leave all of this behind for a moment and reconnect." Evelyn hesitated. While the idea sounded nice, she still carried the weight of uncertainty. "Do you think we're ready for that? It feels too soon." Conrad placed his hand over hers on the table. "I know we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think it could be a step in the right direction. I want us to remember why we fell in love." His words moved her. Despite her fear of being hurt again, Evelyn agreed. "All right, but let's keep it simple." They chose a small cabin in a nearby coastal village. The place was quiet, surrounded by nature, with a view of the ocean that promised to be therapeutic. Evelyn felt a mix of nervousness and hope as she packed her bags, wondering if this trip could truly help them. Upon arrival, the light-hearted atmosphere began to break the ice between them. During a walk along the beach, Conrad opened up. "You know, Evelyn, I didn't want to admit it, but I realized I was holding on to the past because, in some way, I was afraid to face what was wrong in the present." Evelyn stopped and looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "And what do you think was wrong?" Conrad took a deep breath before answering. "I think I stopped paying attention to the little things. The moments we shared, your needs. I was physically present, but emotionally, I checked out. And I'm so sorry for that." His words were a relief for Evelyn, who had been waiting a long time for that kind of acknowledgement. "I closed myself off too, Conrad. I felt something was wrong, but I didn't know how to address it. That pushed us even further apart." They continued walking, the sound of the waves filling the moments of silence. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt they were beginning to understand each other again. That evening, as they dined on the cabin's porch, Evelyn smiled at Conrad. "You know, I think today was the first time in a long time that I felt hopeful." Conrad returned her smile, a hint of emotion in his eyes. "Me too. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to build it with you." They toasted with a glass of wine, a symbolic gesture of a new beginning. Although there was still a long road ahead, that moment felt like a sign they were finally heading in the right direction. After their weekend at the cabin, Evelyn and Conrad returned home with a new perspective. The trip had been a small step, but both knew there was still much work to be done. However, that brief moment of reconnection filled them with hope to keep trying. The following week, during one of their sessions with Dr. Morgan, he suggested an exercise for the couple. "I want you to write a letter to each other. It doesn't have to be long, but it should be honest. Write about how you feel now and what you hope for in your future together. Evelyn and Conrad agreed, though the task made them nervous. For both, putting such deep emotions into words felt daunting, but they knew it could be an important step toward healing. Evelyn dedicated an entire evening to her letter. She started hesitantly, but soon the words began to flow. She wrote about her pain, her distrust, but also the love she still felt and her desire to rebuild what they had lost. When she finished, she felt a mix of relief and vulnerability. Conrad, on the other hand, spent hours staring at a blank page before starting. He wanted Evelyn to know how much he regretted his mistakes and how much she still meant to him. He also wrote about his fear that, despite all their efforts, they might not overcome this. When he finished, his letter was filled with sincerity but also hope. At their next session, Dr. Morgan asked them to read the letters aloud. Conrad went first. His voice trembled as he read, and Evelyn felt tears well up as she listened. He spoke about his regrets and how he wanted to be a better husband, someone she could trust again. When it was Evelyn's turn, she hesitated but began to read. Her words were strong yet filled with emotion. She spoke about the pain she felt and her struggle to hold on to hope, but also about her desire to move forward together, as long as there was honesty and commitment. By the end, the silence in the room was heavy but not uncomfortable. Dr. Morgan gave them a small smile. "You've taken an important step today. The honesty and vulnerability you've shared here are the foundation of any reconciliation. Remember this on the difficult days." On the way home, Evelyn held Conrad's hand in the car. It was a small gesture, but it carried deep meaning. They still had a long road ahead, but at that moment, it felt like they were truly in this together. Small changes in their daily lives. Though there was still hesitation, both were more willing to have open conversations. Each exchange, no matter how simple, seemed to contribute to rebuilding the bond they had lost. One evening, as they cooked together, something they hadn't done in years, Conrad spoke unexpectedly. "I feel like we're starting over. It's strange to think that maybe we needed to go through all of this to realize how much we mean to each other." Evelyn smiled as she stirred the sauce in the pan. "It's strange, but it makes sense. I think we never really saw what we had until we started to lose it." Despite the positive tone, Evelyn still carried doubts. They were smaller but would occasionally surface, reminding her of what they had endured. One seemingly ordinary afternoon, Conrad decided to address this head-on. He walked into the living room where Evelyn was reading, holding the notebook that had caused so much tension in the beginning. He sat next to her on the couch and placed the notebook in her hands. "I want you to read this. It's personal, but I think it's time to share everything with you." Evelyn looked at him, surprised and a little nervous. "Are you sure? I don't want to invade something that's just yours." Conrad nodded, his expression serious but calm. "I'm sure. I don't want there to be anything between us that you don't know." As Evelyn flipped through the notebook, she realized it contained Conrad's thoughts, reflections, and most of all, doubts he had carried for years. Some pages mentioned Marianne, but it became clear that the past had never been about love or desire but rather unresolved regrets and choices. When she finished reading, Evelyn looked at Conrad with teary eyes. "I never imagined you were holding on to so much. Thank you for trusting me enough to share this." Conrad held her hand. "I should have done this from the beginning. Keeping it hidden was my biggest mistake, but I want to make it right now, every single day." That evening, as they ate dinner, Evelyn noticed something different. Conrad's honesty had eased many of her lingering doubts. It wasn't a finished process, but she felt a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Before bed, Conrad hugged Evelyn and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me, even when I gave you reasons not to." Evelyn smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for showing me it's worth believing." In that moment, they both realized the love they shared was stronger than any obstacle they had faced. It was a new beginning, still fragile but full of potential. As the weeks passed, Evelyn and Conrad began to feel more connected than they had in years. It wasn't an easy process. There were still moments of tension, arguments and doubts, but the difference now was that both were committed to working through them together. One morning, while having coffee on the porch, Conrad looked at Evelyn and said something that surprised her. "Evelyn, I've been thinking, maybe we should renew our vows." She paused, her cup halfway to her lips, and looked at him curiously. "Renew our vows? Do you think we're ready for that?" Conrad smiled, his gaze full of sincerity. "I don't think it's about being ready. It's about reaffirming what we're building. About showing that, despite everything, we still choose each other. His words touched something deep within Evelyn. It was a symbolic idea, but it represented much more than just a gesture. "If that's what you want, then I want it too," she replied, feeling a wave of emotion. They planned a simple ceremony, just the two of them, in a park where they used to walk early in their marriage. There would be no guests, just an officiant and the surrounding nature. Evelyn chose a light dress, and Conrad wore a white shirt she loved. Everything felt perfectly imperfect. On the chosen day, as they got ready, Evelyn looked at herself in the mirror and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Lightness, hope. When she arrived at the park and saw Conrad waiting under the shade of a tree, her heart raced as if she were falling in love with him all over again. During the ceremony, Conrad held Evelyn's hands and looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her forget all the difficult moments. "Evelyn, I chose you 12 years ago, and I choose you again today. Not because we're perfect, but because our love is worth it. I promise to keep learning, growing, and being the man you deserve." Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face as she smiled. "Conrad, I choose you too, despite everything. I promise to keep believing in us and working to make our love stronger every day." After exchanging their vows, they sealed the moment with a kiss. As they walked back to the car hand in hand, Evelyn felt this was the beginning of something new. It wasn't the happily ever after of fairy tales, but something more real. The daily choice to love, forgive, and move forward together. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel and give it a like, so you will always receive amazing stories like this one. Thank you.